Believe it or not, no human will touch a media plan within 5 years. That's not a prediction from a futurist. It's a promise from the man who was, at least the time he said it, running the largest media buying operation in the world. I'm Omar Oakes.
And I'm Hamish Nicklin.
And this is Believe It or Not, a podcast where two people who spent their careers inside media and advertising on opposite sides of the AI debate now find out whether the biggest claims actually hold up. Before we get into that, Hamish, so something caught my eye this week that I want to throw at you before we get into the meat of the podcast. So have you heard of this? A horror novel called Shy Girl by an American writer called Mia Ballard has just been pulled from sale. In the US, where it was about to launch, and in the UK, it had already been on shelves since November. The publisher Hachette has now killed it after the New York Times came to them with evidence that, guess what? It had been written using AI. And anyone who follows me on LinkedIn will know I've been talking about this quite a bit. Nobody at Hachette apparently noticed. The book got commissioned, it got edited, it got cover, it got everything. It got shipped to bookshops. It sat on the shelves for months. It took a Reddit thread, if you could believe it, started by someone describing themselves as a book editor of 12 years to flag what was wrong with it. And this is, I come back to, you can, if you use AI, you can, after a while, really tell the conventions that it uses. The tells in this book, apparently, every noun has an adjective, every action has a simile, a repeated construction, something X, something Y, showing up again and again. A reader on one book recommendation called it soulless, mechanical, and flat.
I think it's mad. I think it's mad that a book that was clearly that bad got published in the first place. You know, have you ever tried to get a book published? Obviously, I haven't, but my wife has, and it's hard. So for something that's obviously that bad, to get through all the editing process, the publishing process, the agent process, that's just mad in itself. But then to be written by AI, crikey. I mean, yeah, I think when they're using those obvious tells, you can tell. But Omar, we've had this chat before. I think I could fool you.
We'll definitely get into this, and that's a claim, isn't it? We're gonna interrogate.
That's a claim. There we go. Believe it or not, Omar.
Hamish can bamboozle Omar with brilliant AI writing. Okay, I'll mark that down for future. Okay, Hamish, what's caught your eye this week?
So I saw something. I saw a headline that's a couple of weeks old now, but it said, man uses ChatGPT, spends $3,000 and cures his dog's cancer. Absolutely. Yeah, crazy. I'd love to say this was true. I'd love to say it was OpenAI doing some brilliant PR, but actually it's a lot more interesting than that. So basically the story is there's this Australian data scientist who's been doing this for about 20 years, right? Loads of machine learning experience and zero biology background, right? None whatsoever. Now his dog, Rosie, and I love the fact that the story comes with the detail of Rosie. Rosie, she gets diagnosed with, unfortunately, aggressive mast cell cancer. And they try everything. They try chemo, loads of different types of things. It just doesn't work. The vet says, get yourself sorted. Rosie's got months. So he does what any data scientist would do. He opens up ChatGPT and he starts asking loads of questions. Anyway, eventually gets pointed by ChatGPT to the genomics lab at the University of New South Wales, something he'd never heard of. And he pays $3,000 to get the dog's tumor's DNA sequenced. And that, by the way, is the $3,000 from the headline, right? So that's all it was. Paid $3,000 for the DNA sequencing. Anyway, he gets the data back and he spends months analyzing it himself using ChatGPT and AlphaFold, you know, the AI that got Demis Hassabis the Nobel Prize. Anyway, he condenses all of this analysis into a half-page vaccine for you, right? A half page from a bloke with no biology degree. I just think this is mad. He then takes this to a professor at the university who, in his own words, is gobsmacked. The professor, he then has to do a bit of persuading, right? But the professor and his team builds an mRNA vaccine in under 2 months. And the funny thing is, the ethics paperwork took 3. Anyway, within a month of the first injection, the main tumor had shrunk by 75%. She went from barely being able to jump, at all, to leaping over fences at a dog park and chasing rabbits. Now, it's not a cure, and he's really clear about this himself. Some of the tumors didn't respond at all, and they're actually working on how they can fix those. But the thing is, and the thing I can't sort of get away from is there's this bloke who had an idea, a load of curiosity, some genuine skills and some AIs, and boom, he's done something that none of us could have imagined possible. Now, this dog isn't fixed, right? Rosie, bless her, she still might pop off to puppyland, but amazing, isn't it?
Well, so there are two things. One is obviously the ability to extract information and using an LLM AI to be able to do that for you, even someone who has no domain expertise. It's like it's almost like if you're moving to a situation where it's more important to be good at using the AI than to find out how to study a domain, right? But also, I'm thinking, could this apply to humans?
They absolutely think it can. The devil that was in the detail, though, was it took 2 months to sequence the DNA and get the sort of vaccine script and the vaccine made, but 3 months to get through the ethics papers, which, given that it's hardly highly regulated for pets, imagine what that's going to take for humans. So yes, it's definitely technically possible, but the hoops we'll have to jump through for humans. But the point is, it can be done if we get out of our way, or we do it properly and quickly with the help of ethics advisors and whatever happens. Because I think it is a big ethical debate, right? But there's something huge here, I think, that a dude with some skills, machine learning skills and understanding of how to play with data, a load of curiosity and some AI manages to do this. Like there's something that we can unpack in later episodes about the power of this, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, enough about curing cancer. Let's talk about something more important, and that is media planning and buying. So a reminder of what we're doing here on this podcast. So each episode, we take one big claim about AI in media, advertising, and wider business, and we're going to stress test it. Last time, we got into whether AI is going to eliminate white-collar jobs in big industries within 12 months. Hamish made a really good case for it, despite what we both acknowledged was a lot of AI washing going on right now by tech CEOs who are shedding jobs after hiring like crazy during the COVID bounce back. Now, that was an important first discussion, but we're going to get much more specific about all these AI claims. And of course, given our backgrounds, there's only one real place to start, and that's media. So let's look at the media buying side, what's going to happen to media agencies specifically because of AI. And one of the biggest, if not the biggest AI claims has come from Brian Lesser. Lesser is, of course, CEO of WP Media, which in old money was called Group M. This is not some pundit. Lesser is running what was, at the time he said it, in January 2025, the largest media buying operation in the world. And at the beginning of last year, he told Adweek, quote, "No human will touch a media plan within 5 years." So that obviously creates a lot of headlines, rattles a lot of people in our sector. We've had more than a year of hindsight now. Hamish, you know this world. You know exactly how media agencies run, having previously led Dentsu Media in the UK, and now you're an AI consultant. So go ahead, make the case.
Right. Let me break this down from first principles like I did last time, because I've been thinking about what actually needs to be true for Lesser to be right. And annoyingly, it's not as complicated as I wanted it to be. The reality is there are only 3 conditions, I think, that need to exist for a machine to do a task autonomously. Right? Just 3. And this is about an autonomous task. And we're not necessarily at this stage saying media planning. We'll come to how these 3 could be applied to media planning in a minute, right? So just 3. And they're simple enough to be scary if you're a media planner listening to this, I think. All right. So number 1, you need a metric to optimize against. Something that's measurable and unambiguous. Hit or miss, better or worse, right? Quite simple. Number 2, you need what's called a search space, which is just the set of all the possible combinations of all the things the agent can actually optimize against and with. In media planning, that would be things like channels, budget splits, timings, audience segments, frequency, day part, those sorts of things. Essentially, all the known variables that have known ranges. Number 3, you need a feedback loop. And here's the thing, the feedback doesn't need to be fast. It just needs to be structured. The time frame is relative to the task and the objective that you give to the agent. That's it. You need a metric, a search space, and a feedback loop. And if your domain has those 3 things, you've got the conditions for an autonomous set of optimizations, a machine that can run in a loop without a human in it. Now, before we apply that to media planning, I want to show you something that happened a couple of weeks ago that I think makes this real. But before I get into that, I want to talk about what we actually know about how media works, right? Because the knowledge base here is genuinely extraordinary. We've got 60 years of media effectiveness data, if you think about it. Binet and Field proved with decades of IPA case studies that the optimal split between brand building and activation is roughly 60-40, right? We know this. We know that broad reach and emotional, creative and mass media drives long-term brand growth. We know this. We know that excess share of voice drives market share. We've got mixed modeling data going back years across all major categories. You can already make a pretty good guess at the channel weightings, budget splits, day parts, all that stuff for most campaigns based on their category, their objectives and the budget. It's fairly well documented already. And this stuff isn't just sitting in textbooks. At Dentsu, we have planning tools where a lot of this modeling was already built into it. All the big agencies groups have it, right? They've got data scientists, they've got proprietary MMM platforms, they've got years of campaign performance data feeding into those systems. A planner today, whether doing it consciously or instinctively, or indeed from experience or through a tool, is drawing on patterns that are already codified about how to create a media plan, what that media plan looks like, how successful it would be based on the objectives, the budgets, and the product and the industry, right? So the initial plan, well, it's already part automated in one way or another, one could argue. The human is applying well understood rules, sometimes brilliantly, sometimes instinctively, sometimes through a tool that does a lot of the heavy lifting. But the point is the human knowledge base underneath it is there, it's structured, and Omar, it's learnable.
I think from the outset we should say that when it comes to creativity or something more technical like media planning, there is always an element to which we sort of run on autopilot, and there is just a way of doing things for the most part. And we'll get into this in questions, but yeah, I think that is an important point.
Okay, good. So if that's the planning side, right? Now let's look at what's happening on the execution side, because the infrastructure that helps make this possible is already being built. And it's being built by someone Brian Lesser knows pretty well. Brian O'Kelly, or Bok as he's often known, co-founded AppNexus, right? He's literally credited with inventing programmatic advertising. And his history with Lesser goes back years. Lesser sat on the AppNexus board, right? He then went to AT&T, and it was Lesser's team that acquired AppNexus for $1.6 billion in 2018 to form Xandr. Lesser became O'Kelly's boss, right? When Lesser says no human touches a media plan in 5 years, he's not guessing about the technology. He's watched the bloke who invented programmatic build it from the inside. And now that same bloke is building the next iteration, because Bok runs Scope 3, and he's building what he calls an operating system for agents, AI agents that buy and sell media to each other with no humans in the loop. And this is live, right? This is happening. Last October, they ran the first live agent-to-agent media buy, a buying agent on one side, a selling agent on the other, real publisher inventory in the middle, real transactions, all done. Now, to be clear, that's the execution layer. Agents negotiating and transacting. It's not the planning layer. It's not an agent taking a brief and working out the optimal channel mix, but it shows you the plumbing is being laid at the buying end. And it's not just O'Kelly. There's now a protocol called AdCP, the Ad Context Protocol, with over 20 companies signed up, including Yahoo and Pubmatic and a bunch of others. They're building a common language for agents to negotiate and transact across the entire advertising ecosystem. This is real infrastructure that we're seeing being built right now. So it's not 5 years' time, Omar. It's actually happening. So if that's the execution bit, the actual buying and negotiating of media, let's come back to planning. So as I said at the beginning, the planning knowledge is codified, right, to all intents and purposes. And I know I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for this, but broadly, you could argue a lot of that knowledge is codified. And as I said, the execution infrastructure is being built. The question is, how do we connect the two? For Lesser to be right, that's what's going to need to happen. Now, this is where something that happened a couple of weeks ago, I think, ties the whole thing together. Andrej Karpathy, he's the guy who co-founded OpenAI with Sam Altman, and he's the former head of AI at Tesla. He's one of those names where when he posts something, the whole tech world stops and they pay attention. Now, a couple of weekends ago, and I remember I saw this myself and went, what? The actual? He published a 630-line Python script on GitHub, and then he went to sleep. Now, a Python script on GitHub, it's basically a set of instructions, 630 lines, not very long. And what it did was it took a language model training task, so teaching an AI to get better at processing language, and it set up a loop. The loop modifies the code, trains the model for exactly 5 minutes, only 5 minutes, checks whether the result improved against a single metric, keeps what worked, throws away what didn't, and does it again and again and again, all night long. By morning, he woke up and he had found that it had run 126 experiments. He left it running for 2 days and he got 700 experiments, and it found 20 improvements that he, Andrej Karpathy, one of the most respected AI researchers alive, had missed in 20 years of doing this work manually. All right, 20 years. And here's a bit that really got me. Someone else ran the same thing on a Mac Mini, right? Tiny little computer, a Mac Mini M4, in fact, not a data center, not some multi-million-dollar rig, the kind of computer you'd have on your desk. Most of the experiments crashed, yes, but the ones that work found genuine improvements. Now, he posted this and it blew up. 8.6 million views in 2 days, and within hours, every man and his dog was mapping this loop onto their own domain. Drug discovery, quant trading, clinical trial and design. And guess what kept coming up over and over again, Omar? Marketing. Marketing kept coming up again and again. Why? Because people immediately recognized that the 3 conditions I talked about, a metric, a search space, a feedback loop, had all been met. So go back to what I said about media planning. The knowledge base is codified. The patterns are well understood. You've got clear metrics, a known set of variables, and results that come back in structured ways. You've got the execution plumbing being built on the buying end, and now you've got a proven pattern for how autonomous optimization actually works.
Okay, I'm with you. But sorry if I'm wrong. This is all digital. So programmatic, I understand that. I understand how you can automate that with AI. But what about TV, print, out of home?
Yeah, and that's the objection, isn't it? That's real-time bidding. That's instantaneous digital feedback. Milliseconds between bid and result. Of course, agents can do that. Programmatic was already halfway automated anyway. So you're right. What about all the media that doesn't give you instant feedback, right? Where you buy the spots, you wait weeks or months for the results, and then you adjust. Surely you need a human in that loop. And I think this is where most people in the industry stop. They go, yeah, for digital, fine. But for everything else, no chance. You need a human. And I thought that too, until I went back to those 3 conditions, and specifically the one around time. So let's just remind ourselves of those 3 conditions: a metric, a set of levers, a feedback loop where the time frame is relative to the task and the objective. The Karpathy loop ran in 5-minute cycles because that's what the task needed. But the principle of the loop doesn't care about speed, it cares about structure. Think about a TV campaign. You've got historical ratings data from Barb. You've got cost per thousand benchmarks going back decades. You've got audience profiles. An agent can build a TV schedule, buy the spots computer to computer with a broadcaster selling system, if and when they build that, wait for the post-campaign analysis, feed that back in, and optimize the next flight. The loop is slower, yes, weeks instead of milliseconds, but it's still a loop. Print, same logic. Readership data, rate cards, historical response data. The agent books the placements. The results come in over time, as in the way that we do our MMM at the moment. All of that stuff, that data gets captured, gets gathered. It adjusts the next run. Out of home, route data, footfall data, demographic overlays. It's increasingly digital anyway through digital out of home. But even traditional poster sites have structured data. And actually, Burnett and Field would tell you this is fine, wouldn't they? The whole point in the long and the short of it is that you shouldn't be optimizing brand campaigns in real time anyway. The 60-40 split between brand building and activation, well, we all know the brand building side works over months and years. You don't have milliseconds feedback, perhaps, to run the loop, but you do get structured data coming back and a metric you're optimizing against over the right time frame. The loop doesn't care if it takes 5 minutes or 5 months. It just needs to know whether the last thing it tried worked.
So it's not really about speed, but what is really important is the data is structured that you're using.
Yeah. And we already get that structured data because that's how we build a lot of our models that feed into what works next time and what's worked in the past, right? So the data exists. What you need is just a loop and a machine that can figure out what data you got. Did it hit metrics? What metrics changed? And it can look at all of these thousands of data points and say, right, okay, what we need to do is up our weighting here, down our weighting there, buy again. Now, it's not real-time optimization like digital, but then again, media isn't, right? These things often take months and years to have an impact on P&Ls and bottom lines. That's the whole point about brand building. But to say you can't automate that, given that you have a Karpathy loop now, and you have potential access to all of that data because the data does exist, I'm coming around to the fact that maybe he's got a bit of a point.
Yeah. Okay. I know that you're coming to the end of this, steel manning this claim, but are you going to talk about creativity at all? Because you made a compelling case so far about how you can use data in media, but it doesn't sound like much creative thinking, what you've described.
No, and I'm sure we'll come back to that because creativity in a media plan is fundamentally important. But you actually raise another issue, which is that, and I know a lot of planners might throw their phones on the floor and want to come after me about this, but the reality is not every campaign needs a shed load of creativity. It's not that they're lazy and they're just rinse and repeating. It's that actually, when you look at a lot of the way that these campaigns run, the products haven't really changed. The target audience doesn't really change, right? Because we've been doing this for 50 or 60 years. We know who we're targeting, and we know what our product is. We know what the industry is doing. Competitors don't radically change every month or every quarter. The sort of stuff that does change is the technology or maybe even a new media owner. And again, they don't even change every month and every quarter. So what you could say is that on many instances, that campaign getting put through some form of Carpathy loop by an AI that doesn't get sick, doesn't get bored, doesn't get tired, is constantly able to analyze many more data points and put forward many more different tests and hypotheses of those and tests of those hypotheses, is actually going to do a better job for those sorts of campaigns. Because as I said, it's arguable that not all campaigns need the sort of creativity that we get excited about when we read awards.
Shocking, I tell you. Right.
True though, man.
Before I get to the questions that I plan to ask you, I mean, it just struck me as you said this, where I accept as that what you've just said, that not every, if you're maybe a big FMCG brand, you mentioned toothpaste just now, you can kind of rinse and repeat with a lot of your media plan, your advertising, but then why do you need an agency at all? If you're Haleon or Aquafresh's brand owner, if, as you say, get the Binet and Field insights, get the IP effectiveness data yourself, put it into an AI. Why do you need an agency at all?
Dude, that is a huge question. I mean, I think you need an agency because being able to do all of that stuff, even if you bring it in-house, needs expertise, right? So lots of clients are in housing. That isn't a new phenomenon. But I would say, even if you could get an AI to do this stuff, understanding all of the data that's available, most clients don't have. So the patterns are there. The patterns are well understood. But what an agency has is 20, 30, 40 years worth of data. They have it across multiple industries, multiple clients. And that's what they can point the AI at, whereas a client doesn't have that. So I think, right now, it still makes an awful lot of sense to keep going with your media agency. And what's more, the media agency can do the negotiations with the media owners to get better deals than you would do if you went direct. So on the buying side, potentially, still today, that really matters. So 2 answers to your question. 1, the agency has got significantly more data to throw at the AI than you could ever had as a single advertiser. And 2, they can negotiate better deals because they're significantly larger than you could as an advertiser. So your media is going to be cheaper. So I'd say there's still value in it, but I bet there's a lot of CMOs who are watching the Carpathy loops of this world going, maybe we could bring it in. And, when Brian Lessers talks about 5 years, we're only 1 year into that 5-year sort of vision of his. In 4 years' time, who knows how much data is going to be available for everybody to use and optimize it against. But right now, absolutely still use an agency.
Yeah. Okay. Well, my broad feelings about what you've said also is, are you really describing a media plan? You've definitely described what I'd say is an optimization machine, a very good optimization machine. But in the real world, a brief doesn't start with just channel weightings and budget splits, as you described when you talked about Binet and Field, which, by the way, the 60-40 split they talk about, as I understand it, that is the aggregate over time of what all big brands would be doing. It's not a deliberate prescription for a brand you shouldn't do 60% brand building. It's not a prescription. It's an observation. But these media plans, they start with problems, don't they? It's somewhere between the client's problem and a flow chart, something that has to happen that isn't pattern matching. Could call that insight. Maybe that's $2,000. You're going to tell me a machine can do that too. Let's find out. But yeah, you haven't actually mentioned insight once, have you? I mean, isn't that where the plan actually starts? After the brief, before the flow charts. So if no human touches a media plan, how are you getting that insight?
Well, I think you've hit on the biggest problem that Brian Lesser's claim faces, because you're absolutely right. It doesn't just start there. It usually starts with insight. Now, again, that depends on the campaign. So if you go back to what I said before about these sort of always on, hardly thing changing, what's the insight? The insight really is the results of the last campaign, which then feeds back into the loop. But let's presume that not every campaign exists that way, because they don't. And some are genuinely new. Some are genuinely new and exciting. Before I get into that, though, I want to just be really clear about something that most people in this industry use interchangeably, but they shouldn't. And I know planners and strategists I spoke to usually get really cross when people use these terms interchangeably. And they are the difference between data and insight, because they are not the same thing. Data is what people do. It's facts, it's observations, it's behavioral signals. It sits in data sets and it's measurable and structured. Insights is arguably why they do this stuff, right? Why are people doing the things that we've observed them doing? And more importantly, what that means for a brand or a campaign or a piece of creative, right? What does it mean to the brand? Insight is where you take data and make that human leap. So here's a really obvious and well-trodden example, but I think it makes the point. Data point 1, beer sales among men aged 35 to 55 spike on Saturdays between January and March. Data point 2, mobile data shows sports app usage in the same demographic peaks on Saturday afternoons during those same months. Data point 3, social and survey research shows that watching the Six Nations is one of the most emotionally charged and loaded communal results in these blokes' lives. It's the mates, the pub, the whole thing. And yes, years of extensive personal research on this one, Omar. 3 separate data sets. 3 separate data sets. An AI agent could gather all of those 3. It could absolutely spot the correlation. Something's going on with men, beer, and Saturday afternoons in Q1 of most years. But the insight, the human leap, is what a strategist does with that. The insight is he's not buying beer because he's thirsty. The point is the ritual. The beer is match day. You know, it is match day. And you could argue that Guinness saw something like this about a decade ago. They weren't necessarily seeing a spike in sales, but they wanted to create one. They looked at that tribal belonging aspect of rugby and decided to own it. That's why they sponsor the Six Nations. That's why you can't move for Guinness advertising around the Six Nations and all the matches. It's not a media plan that came out of a spreadsheet optimization loop. It came from a strategist who understood what beer means to a rugby fan on a Saturday afternoon in February.
So what you're saying, less is wrong then?
Well, I'm saying potentially it gets a bit uncomfortable here, because while I was preparing for this, I asked Claude in Opus 4.6, so its strongest reasoning model, you know, one of the most capable models that you can get right now, to help me think through beer and rugby example. And it made that leap. It connected the dots. It got to the phrase, the pint is the ritual, without me telling it. That's where we were going.
Obviously, this Guinness has sponsored the Six Nations for a long time. You're saying that it wasn't able to mine the world's knowledge base and kind of come to this conclusion that way? Or are you actually saying that the AI is generating insight independently?
You're right to ask that question. Was it genuine insight, or was that pattern recognition on a pattern it's already seen 1,000 times and has even read the case studies for? I don't know. You might have a point. But if it's pattern recognition, you have to ask yourself, how many advertising ideas that we've had, whether they're insights, genuinely true insights, are really original, and how many of them are just combinations of well-documented patterns that we've seen subconsciously and that we've made? Aren't we just connecting dots? Aren't we just seeing patterns subconsciously when we come up with a new original idea? And if that is the case, as these AI models get cleverer and cleverer and cleverer, and their ability to see connections between significantly more things becomes stronger, whilst it's not a new idea, it might just be a reworked pattern of something that's already happened. As I said, this happens all the time in literature. There's no new story because Shakespeare wrote all of them. In fact, even him probably wrote all of his stories on folklore and tales that have been handed down the centuries.
Well, I forget where the quote comes from, but somebody says that there's no new ideas. There's just ideas that people have forgotten and think it's new. And I've written about this on my Substack. I do book reviews sometimes, and there are lots of books which actually get into this, such as Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon, The Creative Curve by Alan Gannett. There's lots of books that actually get into this about how, yes, there are no new ideas, but that doesn't mean there isn't a process for generating insights and ideas by using that material. And what I love about the AI process is that, using it as a thinking partner, I think it could be incredibly useful in that respect. You mentioned Guinness. I mean, what about things like there's a Channel 4 bespoke sponsorship, a co-created campaign. I'm getting at stuff where you have like a relationship with a media owner and a genuine creative brief that's never existed before. Think about when all the supermarkets got together during COVID and they did the anti-racism campaign. It's hard to say with a counterfactual, but I just don't think AI would have given you something like that just because there's no data set for that.
I think you're right, man. And I think this is where it's arguably very true to say that Lesser is wrong. Because I think there will definitely be things like that where there is no data set, where there are no patterns, where you need a human to make those leaps. You need a human to come together to think specifically about how, the counter-racism example you talked about, but even on a more mundane, more everyday, what a media partnership would look like with The Guardian or Channel 4 or, one of these other broadcasters or an out-of-home company, like being very creative about what an execution looks like based on an exact brief and an audience and budget. There's probably not enough data there for the AI to apply to come up with some of the fantastic ideas that I used to see all the time when I was judging those pieces of work in award ceremonies and what have you. So yeah, I think humans for that, I think they really do matter. And what's more is a lot of those ideas only come about because two humans met in the pub or they had a meeting over a cup of tea to say, hey, look, did you know there's this new thing that we haven't told anyone about yet that's coming up? This new, it could be a new thing that Channel 4 are doing, or a new product that somebody's creating, or a series of articles or a series of themes that a news brand is going to create. The AI wouldn't know they exist. That only happens because humans are talking to other humans, either in a more formal sort of meeting setting or serendipitously down the boozer, right? And that's what the value of the human in the media plan. So that's a really strong argument for why Less is wrong.
It reminds me of that apocryphal story. I'm sure it's not true, where Morris Saatchi is talking to somebody who I think he runs one of the big airlines, and they're somewhere in the 1980s, like the Groucho or somewhere, and this airline boss is, I've got this real problem with this brand, and Saatchi literally kind of writes something down on a piece of paper, and it's like a campaign slogan, hands it to him, and the client goes, "Oh, that's perfect. Yes. Can your agency help us?" It's like, "Yes, that'll be £1 million, please." It's like, £1 million, but you just came up with that in 5 seconds. It's like, no, it took me 30 years of experience to come up with that.
No, but I think that's absolutely bang on. And B, it's a brilliant story. I hope it's not apocryphal. I really hope that's true. And again, you're right. It proves the point, doesn't it?
Yeah, but what about brand safety? I mean, that's a judgment call. You can't, how can you automate that editorial judgment that comes with deciding that's just not brand safe, or that's just a bit too strange, or whatever?
God, don't get me started on brand safety. I put my old Guardian hat on and think about all the rows I used to have with agencies and technologies, solutions that were claiming to be able to do brand safety automatedly. Because to your point, I think most of the industry is already outsourcing brand safety to terrible keyword blocking tech. I don't know if it's improved because I've not been in it for a few years, but, ask any news brand that's ever had an article with is in it. Is. IS, right? Some of these things not long ago were blocking all of those articles because of ISIS. Because
Islamic State
is in it. It's insane. And you must have written about this, right?
Many times, yeah.
There's an example as well where JFK's moon landing speech was flagged as unsafe because it contained the word weapons. I could go on. I've got literally thousands of these examples stuck in my head. So arguably, the current human managed brace safety is arguably worse than what an AI would do with proper contextual understanding. Because, it's not a human AI, but it is the human who's telling these tools what keywords to block. And they're not thinking through the context of what that means. So somebody with all honesty and a sense of duty and care to their client would almost certainly have put ISIS in a keyword blocking tool because they don't want to be around content that might be terrorist. Even that, I think, is arguably stupid because news content was some of the most powerful content there was in a news brand. But even if you disregard the sort of effectiveness impact that that's going to have, you could argue the human was doing their best. But the unintended consequences were massive. And I'd like to think, given how intelligent these AIs are and how I've seen them think contextually, they would have picked that up and flagged it as a pushback to say, are you sure you want to do that? Here are the implications. And then we might have got to a better solution. So I would actually flip it, man. And I would say, I reckon AI would do a better brand safety job than a lot of the human-led tools are doing today.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we already have real world examples of that. We've had Mantis, Reach's Mantis has been in operation for many years now, and known to create better results when it comes to keyword blocking and filtering out unbrand safe content, as well as, I forget the name of it, but News UK have their own solution, which has been operational for less time, but it's been around for a while. But of course, those tools have humans behind them, and this wonderful AI media planner that you're describing. What happens if the plan goes wrong? Client goes mad? Who's responsible? Who's going to be accountable?
I would say someone still has to press go. Right? Someone approves something somewhere. Whether it's the client who pushed for automation and pressed go on the automation plans. Maybe it's the agency who approved the plan, or even both. You hit on something, I think, that needs much more discussion about AI implementation, and that is that ethics and governance question that we do need to debate and discuss more broadly when it comes to agentic automations and loops. It's probably both client and agency on this, that we need some shared accountability to this. We need to find a way of doing it properly. Having said that, we didn't stop using programmatic because of accountability questions, did we? We just built governance around it. You think about how many times clients woke up and found their brands on the Times front page because they had appeared next to YouTube ISIS terrorist content, right? That was arguably programmatically driven, way pre the world of AI that we're seeing now, although it was probably, machine learning, which is essentially the same thing, just not generative. But accountability issues have existed before, and we just need to build proper governance around what we do, I reckon.
Yeah. I mean, it comes to a broader point. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a client service industry. Don't clients just want to deal with humans, a senior person, someone that they can have a lunch with and discuss things, or even if things go wrong, a throat to choke?
Yeah. I mean, you definitely want that, right? At a senior level, they want that experience, as you say, a throat to choke. And oh man, let's be even more honest. Some of them just want to hang out with stars and they want to be wined and dined and taken to cool places. We've all had those, right? That relationship piece, that ability to take people to Cannes, take them to a concert where they might meet a famous person or some event, that still exists. That's still very human. And frankly, I don't talk badly about those clients. Jesus, it's a hard job. And those are some of the perks. So why not push for it? They still want that. But the reality is they want the humans who are going to do the thinking, who really understand their business. I don't think they give two shits if someone is a human pushing buttons or whether it's a machine. Think about the time, I go back to when I joined Google in 2006. We used to have this fabulous role called a maximizer. Now, a maximizer were basically a bunch of incredibly bright Oxbridge grads who all came out with a first-class English degree or whatever the hell, they called it, but they were always English graduates. And their job was to write the little copy that went alongside a search ad and to choose the keywords. And then they would sort of organize and optimize the account accordingly, right? Structure it and do all that stuff. Then over time, Google started automating all of that. Whereas now you've got to a stage where you can't write your own copy. You can hardly even choose your keywords, I don't think. no one gives a shit that there's no human doing that. No one's even noticed, I bet you, that the maximizer's gone. Probably about, when was I? I would say about 2011, maybe. It changed from being a maximizer to an account strategist because they realized the role had changed and adapted and got bigger. You still had humans. You didn't get rid of those humans. They just did different things. They thought more about how you apply DV360 or how you bring YouTube in and how you think differently about all the different Google assets that you could bring to the account, not just optimizing the manual keywords and copy because that could get automated. And I think that's actually a really interesting set of conversations about what this means for the future. If a lot of this stuff is automated, doesn't mean that the humans go, or do they just change? Because the experience I had of maximizers becoming account strategists shows that the work changes. The humans don't go. They arguably do more interesting work. Because I remember those maximizers were bored shitless. They thought, hang on a second, I studied 3-4 years at Oxford or Cambridge to come out with a quality English degree. And I'm sitting here typing words into a spreadsheet.
Well, welcome to the world of work is all I can say to that. But let's talk about second order effects, where we'll get into that a little bit more before we get to our verdict. So even if you're half right about this, Hamish, you must accept surely that even if the machine takes over and it's always on, rinse and repeat campaigns, and let's say that it leaves a strategic layer still to humans, something significant is going to change. Let's talk about junior people, but specifically whether we call them maximizers or not, junior planners. So what are we going to do? We're going to cut, let's cut 10 40K juniors, hire 5 80K strategists. The work becomes more strategic. Okay, so where do those juniors go?
Yeah, before we get into that, this is where I want to try and win back some friends from the media planners and the strategists who I might have pissed off with my sort of case for automation at the beginning, to say, listen, even though there are definitely some campaigns that are rinse and repeat, right? Because things don't change. The need to have people thinking creatively and strategically about a client's business and how you can apply media to solving some of those challenges is as prevalent today as it ever has been. In fact, arguably more so, because the amount of channels and the amount of technology that exists for a client to use to how they can spend their money is greater than ever. So what happens to those people, to answer your question, right? Well, when I was at Dentsu, I desperately wanted to hire more strategists and more planners with experience who could sit in front of a client and do everything we've just talked about, which is talking strategically about their business, their challenges, and how media could support them. But I couldn't afford more of them. Arguably, what you get to here is a place where you just change the makeup of your cost base, right? You change, instead of having 100 juniors and only a handful of strategists, you maybe have 10 juniors who are ensuring the machines work. And that money you've saved goes towards investing in people who can then later have the skills to be a really strong media planner or strategist. That doesn't mean you don't have juniors. And it goes back to what we said last time about what you see the role of entry level is. You train them. You hire people who are entry level, but you train them specifically to do work that is strategic and more upstream to the execution piece of the media plan. Train them to spend time with clients, train them to understand how to solve those problems strategically. And that's where you'd spend your money. So I don't think it's as clear cut as saying, well, if the machines are doing all of that, you can cut all of those heads straight from your P&L and don't replace them with anything else. Because I think there isn't a CEO out there who wouldn't kill to have more strategists and media planners working on their business. And there isn't a client out there who wouldn't say, God, I'd love to have more of those brains helping me solve my problems. And if this is a way that you could actually afford to do that, then this is an exciting time for the industry.
So when you talk about the roles essentially changing at the coalface in terms of how you interact with an LLM, how the thinking changes, and how junior people are essentially given a different pathway to becoming great at what they do, whatever it is that they end up doing. How does it change in terms of senior management in those organizations, in terms of being able to, do the normal things that you do in the workplace in terms of saying, okay, this person's progressing and this person's doing a good job. When you've got such a top heavy big brain layer of person that's using all this technology beneath them, how do you, it must be quite easy to kind of look at outputs and saying, yeah, the whole thing is doing a good job. But is that because of the people who are running all this tech? Is it because the tech is getting better? Are they good trainers? I'm struggling to kind of see what value senior management is adding going forward to this if the machine is kind of like running along nicely by itself.
The role of senior management will almost certainly need to change. And if you think about how a lot of what they do today is fighting fires because things have gone wrong somewhere, because a client's not happy about something, or a new brief has just landed and they're scrabbling to find resource to do it. Will that go away under this world? Possibly, actually, because if you get a Carpathy loop that is working smoothly, a lot of those sort of errors may well go away. If you train the technology properly and you get the agents to do their thing, the amount of errors might diminish. I don't know. We haven't created this stuff yet, but arguably a lot of the sort of firefighting stuff would go away. The ability to organize teams, that should become an awful lot easier because an AI can understand who's got capacity, who's got resource, who's got the available skill set, who's got the right skill set, and say, this is how I would advise you to curate the people to work on this project. And it's down to the human to make the decision whether they agree, but the AI can help with an awful lot of that sort of thing. In terms of helping people progress through the organization, still that will take typical management, really good management, people skills, understanding the skills required to move to the next level. Those skills may change now, but your ability and need for you as the manager to help people develop those skills, that won't change. That'll still need to be there. Deciding performance reviews, I think, was one of the things you were talking there about, perhaps who should get promoted. Is it really easy to do that if this big-brained AI is doing all the work? I still think you'll be able to tell who's being able to do this stuff well. You'll still see some campaigns perform better than others. Some teams perform better than others. Some humans deliver better results for their clients whilst they're orchestrating the AI machines because they are better at thinking creatively, about thinking laterally, about thinking how to prompt their machine, about thinking about what other sources they can give the AI to use to solve the problems. You give somebody who's not particularly bright and very ill-trained an AI, they can cause awful lots of damage. You give somebody, but they really can. You give somebody who is bright and who's curious, and you give them training on how to use an LLM, they can do astonishingly powerful things. So ultimately, what you're looking at is, should people progress? I think it should always be based on the output. I mean, there was an article I read in Campaign the other day, I'm sorry, media leader, but I do read Campaign as well, that asked the question of 4 different people: should people's ability to get promoted be solely down to their use of AI? And I just think absolutely fucking not. It's about, are they delivering outputs that have an impact and matter? If they're using AI to do that, brilliant. And increasingly, you're going to find good people who are curious, who know how to use AI, are going to be delivering significantly stronger outputs than people who don't know how to use AI and maybe don't have the curiosity or the cognitive ability of others. So you're naturally going to see progression, hopefully, for all the right reasons anyway.
It reminds me of bring it back to Ad Wanted and the Media Leader. One of them was at their Future Media event last year. There was a panel and they were talking about AI, and there was a chap called Dan Hagen from Havas, and he said something that stuck with me at the time. He said, throughout our professional careers, we're so used to kind of doing a good piece of work and being recognized for that piece of work, getting a pat on the head, promotion, whatever it is. And now we're going to have to get comfortable with living in a world where we don't get credit for producing work in the same way, where I see it myself in, as a one-man production machine when I do writing for myself. I rely on AI tools to help me refine and do a lot of copy editing. So to an extent, I'm using a tool to do stuff that, I can't do that human crafting as much as I did because I wouldn't have the time, or because in a lot of cases it is faster and better at doing certain specific things. So that's a micro example of how humans going forward are going to have to be more comfortable with not achieving credit in the same way.
Well, Dan's point is really interesting, actually. I was talking to a client just 2 days ago when I was asking them how much they think their team is using AI. And he said, we don't really know. We don't have the stats specifically, but he thinks it's much higher than people will admit. And I said, Why is that? And he said it's for exactly that reason. It's like people don't want to admit they're using AI because they're worried if they admit to using AI, they won't get the pat on the head and the congratulations for the great work because we feel, well, AI did it. It wasn't you. And I said to him, okay, well, that's a management problem. That's your problem. You've got to change the culture because ultimately, and they were a bit astonished, but I was pointing my finger like I am now. Because I said, look, at the end of the day, the culture of whether people feel rewarded for good work or not is down to you. And everybody sooner or later is going to be using AI for some parts of their job. The question is not whether you used AI, it's how well you used AI. And the output would be completely different if you used AI well to if you used AI poorly. And the people who use it well and get great outputs, I think, still need the pat on the head and the recognition because it's their ability to use AI that is still the human skill in that case, right? So the output's better. So what if the AI did some of the work? They were the orchestrator. They were the ones getting the AI to do the work because it does take skill to get an AI to deliver something good at the end of the day. When I first started using it, I look back at some of the conversations I had with ChatGPT. The stuff I came up with was rubbish.
Let's move on to verdict. Same rules apply. Nobody wins. I'm using bunny ears on my fingers. Nobody wins, but we both have to say where we've landed and why we've landed there. So, Hamish, do you believe the claim that no human's going to touch a media plan within, I guess it's 4 years now?
I think I believe 90% of the claim because 4 years is a long time in AI. But I still think there are elements of this that you genuinely need a human to do.
I came in thinking that this was a lot of bravado, CEO making headlines. I think you made an important point right at the start about how Brian Lesser worked with, he was Brian O'Kelly's boss, and you can kind of just imagine the conversations that were being had leading up to when he came back to Group M and having this idea, whether it's actually going to happen in the real world. I was always very skeptical, but I think you raise a lot of really interesting points about, frankly, what is a big agency in the world to do for a big advertiser. Actually, a lot of it can probably be automated even more. Is that going to be good for holding companies like WPP in the long run? I've written a lot about this. I don't think so. I won't get into why. You can read previous columns I've written for the Media Leader, actually, about that. But at the end of the day, the bit that is going to save a media planner's job is insight. The bit that should worry, inspire them, I guess it depends how you think about it, is how much of what they call insight is actually well-documented pattern recognition, and how much does it matter that it came from you looking out of the window, making connections in your head, or whether it was an LLM to help you. And I still don't know what the precise answer is to that. So I'm kind of with you, actually. I believe it more than I did, but I may be on the 50-60% rather than 90%.
All right. I would just like to go back to one of the points you made there, which is the fact that the media planner's job is going to be more focused about insight. I think it's going to be bigger than that. I don't think media plan is going to get done away with just because a plan can be broadly automatable, right? I still think there's going to be a massive need for a human to be sitting down with another human to understand their business problems, to discuss and debate how those problems can be solved through media. And I think there's going to be more opportunity to go upstream to do that sort of thinking. Now, that might not be what everybody wants to do, but I know there are an awful lot of people who wish that's what they could be doing more of.
All right. Thank you so much, Hamish Nicklin, for talking to me about all this.
It's a pleasure, man. It's fun. I'm sure people are going to have lots of views on this. And I would love to hear where I'm wrong.
Yeah, I love people telling me I'm wrong. No, I really do, because I do learn from it and get better. So that is episode 2 of Believe It or Not. We're on the Media Leader every Thursday for this limited run of episodes. If something we said was wrong, or there was evidence that we missed, we do want to hear it genuinely. Email Omar at oomph.com or Hamish at goagentflow.com. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we will catch you next time on Believe It or Not.